Hi, this is Jeff, and this is a quick tutorial video that will explain the difference between a vectored file type and a file type that is not vectored. And so this video is really to help explain the right type of file so that when you go to do a large format print like a trade show display or a banner stand, you'll be able to locate the right type of file for whoever's going to design it, whether it's going to be the supplier or your graphic designer. So to start with, I'm going to explain the difference between some of the more common file types that are out there. And so to start with, these three on the top here, the Adobe Illustrator, an encapsulated PostScript, usually we just call it an EPS, and the PDF, the Adobe PDF. All three of these have the potential of being vectored. It doesn't necessarily mean it will if you go to open it, because it all depends on how it was created in the first place. Is it the raw file format that, like your logo? Is it going to be the raw file that your graphic designer used to originally create your logo? But these all three can be a vectored type of file versus these down below here, which we're all familiar with JPEGs. Here's some other file types like PNGs, TIFFs, Photoshop files, GIFs, and there's some other ones like bitmaps. None of these can be vectored. These are all raster type files, which means DPI, dots per inch. It goes off of pixels, and it's not a program where it can be vectored like these three up here. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to go over some of these more common file types and actually open them and show you how you can determine if they're vectored or not. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go through some of the different type of file formats that we just talked about and determine if each one is vectored or not. And really the way to do that, to ultimately determine if your file is vectored, is going to be in Adobe Illustrator. So let's start with some of the files that we just went over. Here is an EPS, which is not vectored, and here's an EPS that is vectored. Now, if we go back to the original, it says that it can be vectored if it's an EPS. But here's an EPS and here's an EPS. Only one of them is vectored, this one, and the other one is not. So I want to go over the difference between those. So I have it open here in Adobe Illustrator, and this is the vectored EPS one. And the way that you find out is you actually click and you highlight the selection tool and you go right over the top of it. Now, if it ends up with an outline, see how there's little dots all the way around it, we know that it's vectored. And you can do some stuff. You can change everything about it. You can go to Object and Ungroup, and you can select just part of it right there. And I can, then go to Edit, and I can cut it and remove it. So that tells me that it's vectored, that I was able to create a whole outline over the whole thing and see all those little dots. Versus a not vectored EPS. So this is going to be this one right here. And you can see if I go and I do the exact same thing and I highlight over it, I don't have those little dots. So if I go back, see all these little dots here, they don't show up on this one. So I actually can't edit it. This tells me that it's flattened, it's a raster file, and that's going to mean that it's not going to enlarge. I'm not going to be able to resize it up as big as I would be able to with this one, because this is the raw file format, which will stretch. It will resize without any problems. Okay, so the same thing is true with some of the other ones. Here's a vectored PDF right here, and here's a PDF that's not vectored. So it's the same thing. If I were to go into Illustrator, the vectored one, I'd be able to highlight over everything, be able to make any changes, edits to it in Illustrator. And the other one, I wouldn't be able to make any changes to it. It's all flattened, it's all locked in place. Okay, so the last part of this video is to kind of tie it all together and determine, well, what does this all mean? So now I know what type of files can be vectored and which ones are not vectored. I can now tell the difference between a file that is vectored. If I open it in Illustrator, I can see for sure that it's vectored. So the last part is to show what all this means and why it's important to have your logo or other type of artwork that's an illustration be vectored for a large format print like a trade show display, even a billboard, anything that's going to be large. So what I have open is a template of one of our displays, and this is a back wall display. And so it's going to be pretty big. It's about 10 feet wide and it's about 8 feet tall. And if I zoom in, you can see the inches here along the top ruler. And here's about 1 inch in real life right here, 61 inches, 62 inches. And you can see I have two pieces of artwork here. And if you remember, we just looked at the EPS files, and one was vectored and one wasn't vectored. And so I dropped both of them into Photoshop here. And we're going to try to use both of them and see what happens and the difference between them. So here's the vectored one right here. And this one's the one that's not vectored. They're both EPS files. Remember, the EPS is the one that has the potential of being vectored. It doesn't necessarily mean it is. So I have both of them in here. And what we're going to do first is we're going to look at the vectored EPS. And here it is right here. And what we want to do is we want to make this really big. So it's going to be on our back wall. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to resize it. And I want to make it really big so that people walking by can see it. And I'm just going to resize it here. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And this is going to go right along the top, just like that. I'm going to place it and do the same thing. I'm going to zoom all the way in on it. And take the navigator tool, if I can find it. And I'm going to inspect it. So I'm going to go right over the top of it here. And you can see that it's still really crisp. There's no pixelation. It's not blurry at all. It looks really good. And that's part of the beauty of a vectored file, is that it can be resized to any size, to infinity really, and it's going to maintain its resolution. It's going to look really good. All right, so that is the advantage of a vectored file. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click off of that, and I'm going to start all over again, except I'm going to start with our EPS that isn't vectored, that's actually flattened. And I'm going to resize this. So same thing. Drag a corner of it. Make sure it's large. And then we'll just position it at the top here. Now, one thing you'll notice right away is this one has a white box behind it. So anytime you have any type of raster file and it doesn't have any design or any color, it's always going to have a white box behind it. That's just because it's locked in place. So now what I want to do is I want to zoom all the way in, just like I did last time, till about 1 inch equals 1 inch. I'm going to use the navigator tool, and I'm going to comb over it. And as you can see, it looks pretty blurry. It actually stretched it out, and it doesn't look good anymore. And this is going to be a real problem, especially if this is, going to be my trade show display, and this is what people are going to see. It's going to, they're going to see my logo, and it's going to be all blurry. That's not very professional. So you can see right here, it doesn't look very good. And if I click off of it and I go back to the EPS version, see how it's really clear, and it's really, it looks nice. So that is the difference. That is why we want vectored artwork. And that's a little bit explaining the difference between the files. And hopefully this video helps, and you can use it for when you go to design your displays or do any type of large format printing. All right, let me know if you have any questions.